Good morning. My name is Sharon Morrison.
How long have you lived in Westminster?
I've lived here, well, I was born and raised here in Westminster. I moved away when I got married for the first time for about 10 to 12 years.
And when was that about that you moved away?
I'd say maybe around 1970 to maybe, well, let's see, I returned back here actually in 1978. So I guess it was more like 8 years. 8 years.
And you moved to where?
I got married for the first time and relocated to Philadelphia, spent some time in Germany, down in Tennessee as military people. He was in the military, so as military people do, they travel all over. So I lived in maybe 2 or 3 different locations.
But you said you were born in Carroll County?
Born in Carroll County.
And your family, how big of a family did you have?
I came from a family of about, let's see, my mother had 6, and we lived with my aunt and her son, so that's 7, 8, 9 of us. Typical black family, matriarch. My grandmother was the matriarch of the family. There was no, well, there was a father present at one point, but then he died, so.
How far back did your family go as residents of Carroll County?
Oh, I think maybe they might. I have memory. I have actually pictures, discussions with my mother of folks who are, I think, my great-great-great-grandparents lived on Union Street at the time. So I think it goes back pretty far.
So we're talking 19th century?
I would think, yes. Even on the church. Now, my church that I attend, which is Union Street United Methodist, right on Union Street, established 1866. I have family members' names on their stained glass windows, so they go back a pretty good distance.
Did your grandmother or mother talk to you about your ancestors, what they did?
A little bit. My grandmother used to be a beautician. She had her shop right in our home on Union Street. We used to live at 49 Union. Her parents, her husband was a porter for the railroad, Baltimore Railroad. Now, I don't know whether that's B&O or what that was. I think great-grands further back used to take in boarders to, raise money for the family. They used to do ironing for people in the community to raise money for the family. Many of them worked at the college. For example, my grandmother worked at the college for over 50 years.
Which is now McDaniel College.
Which is now McDaniel College. So aside from being a beautician, she also worked at the college many years. So, I mean, that's a little bit in what, my mother, for example, worked at Springfield State Hospital for many years before she passed. I had the aunt that lived with me. She left me when I was a second-year student at Morgan State University. So, but I believe that she also worked at the college. So a lot of the folks in my neighborhood, Union Street, worked at the college, which was then Western Maryland. Yeah.
Do you know either through your own observance of it or from what your mother or grandmother told you about how it was for your family, being African American, to live in Westminster during the 19th, early 20th century?
Now, I don't remember much in terms of what they said my great-great-grandparents went through. But I can remember when I was coming up, experiencing, of course, issues of racism. And now I went to an all-black school, so I didn't get it at school.
And that school was?
Robert Moton School. The old Robert Moton, which is over on Center Street. Now they just turned it into Robert Moton Center. But I can recall out in the community itself. You know, if I went to the store or attended carnivals, you know, there were occasions when, you know, I was called names and so forth and so on. I even remember an occasion when my grandmother at the carnival at St. John's up on the hill, you know, an incident where somebody called us a name and she got involved with, I had to settle her down. So she was a pretty spunky 4.5 or 4'11" kind of woman, you know, that stood up. She was the matriarch of our family. She was the strong person in our family. So, but, you know, there were, you know, times like that, you know, but not a lot for me. Other folk might have experienced a lot more, but I learned to just, you know, I think that I had a good childhood. You know, I had all my needs met, and I socialized well with most people in the community, and I belonged to my church. You know, the church, of course, is the focal point of a black community, and Union Street was an all-black community at first until Union Village was built there. And then that changed the whole facet of the community in terms of it now being mixed, white, Hispanic, and so forth, Mexican, which changes the flavor of the church. But, you know, I grew up in the church, and I was active. My life was there as a Sunday school, and then later in Methodist Youth Fellowship, and then as an adult, and I'm still there. So,
let's talk about your time at Robert Moton. It was just a high school. Was it a middle school and high school?
It was all elementary through middle through high school.
And you attended
I did from the 1st to the 12th grade there.
Tell me about your experience there, because you graduated there in 1965.
Yes.
How would you judge the education that you received there?
I actually believe that I received a good education. I think our teachers were excellent. We didn't have a whole lot to work with. We had to use books given to us or given down to us from Westminster High School or wherever they came from. A lot of times not in the best of shape. But those teachers compensated for that. I mean, they went out of their way, did things, maybe even, I think I even heard, did things on their own, you know, a lot of times just to make sure that we got the education that we needed. So I felt that I got a good education. I did very well. I graduated at the top of my class, or the second top, and I went on to Morgan. I had enough about me, I had enough with me, I was given enough education that I was able to go and graduate from Morgan State University as well. So if it was there, you could get it. I mean, it was there, so you could receive it if you wanted it.
I mean, do you believe that your education at Robert Moton was equal to the education that white children were receiving at other schools?
No, I don't know. I mean, I know what I received. I don't know. I'm sure that they had the best of books, and I don't know what their caliber of teachers were like. I don't know that I can, you know, effectively answer that. I just know what I had because of what I experienced. I don't know what anybody else had, you know what I mean?
Were all your teachers at Robert Moton African American?
Yes.
Was it a private school? Were you financed by the county, or
no?
Do you know
it wasn't a private school. It was tied into the county somehow.
Now, during that time period, you were a teenager in Westminster. Can you just tell me how was social life for you? How did it come? Was it segregated? That type of thing.
It was segregated, yes. When we wanted to go to the movies, we could only go to a certain movie.
And where was that? Do you remember that? Where was it located?
I can't remember where. I know it was down at the forks of the road, down the street from Carroll Theater. I can envision it. It's where it was next door to where the old J.C. Penney used to be, which is now, I think, where the city building is. Across from BB&T Bank. It was in that area somewhere. We could only go to that theater, and we could only sit at the top of that theater in the upper part of it. I was okay with just the fact that I had a theater to go to that I could see and I could watch the movie. Um, the blacks were up top. We just learned to, okay, here's where we are, and this is how it has to be, so we're going to make the best out of it. So I guess that's why, now that's not right. It wasn't right. It wasn't acceptable. I didn't like that. But I had to adapt. I mean, I had to make the best of the life that I had based on how it was. So we got along. We had fun. I saw the movie. I saw the same movie that the white kids saw who were down below me. There were times when, yes, things went on from top to the bottom, let's say. But pretty much we got along.
How about the J.C. Penney? Could you go in the J.C. Penney?
Yes, we could go in the stores we could go into. I only can remember the movie theater and maybe a couple of restaurants that we couldn't go into. I can't remember the name of them. I just remember that I couldn't go into some restaurants.
Were there any hotels in town at that time? Westminster?
There could have been. I just don't remember. I think maybe the old hotel on Main Street or something. I don't think Days Inn and things like that were there yet.
How many of your graduating class of '65 do you remember going to college after that, as you did?
Of my class, out of my class, maybe 1, 2, 3. I had a class of 21, which was a very small class. Maybe 3 out of the 21. A young man went into the military and died a year later.
In Vietnam?
Yeah. Maybe 3 out of the 21.
And how, I mean, it has me ask you this question. How big of a school was Robert Bowden? I mean, number of students?
I don't even know. It wasn't like thousands because, for example, my class was only 21. And I think maybe the average class, maybe 35, 40, maybe. Some classes were larger than mine, of course. So I guess if you add it all from first grade to 12th grade, I don't know, maybe I would say less than 1,000. I could be wrong, but I'd say maybe less than 1,000.
Well, how large of an African-American population was there in Westminster in the 60s?
I'm going to take a shot again because I just never concerned myself with those kinds of things. But we were small. There were blacks on Union Street. There were blacks on Charles Street. They were 2 old streets, you know, so there were blacks who lived there for a long time. Those are the only 2 areas. Oh, and Weston Chapel out in, it's really called New Windsor, but it's out on the hill, so to speak, Chapel Hill. The only 3 black residential areas that I was familiar with.
Now, do you believe that was by choice or by necessity that there's only 3 areas that African Americans could live in?
I just think that's just how it was. I don't know that they could stretch out and get into apartments and, you know, I'm thinking there had to be a reason why blacks were segregated here and only here and here and here, you know. There was a lot of history on those streets, you know, which means folks had been there a long, long time. But I'm sure that segregation had a whole lot to do with why, you know, there was, I mean, now we're in the Greens, we were able to buy homes in the Greens and so forth and so on. So it's much more wide open, of course, now.
When you graduated in '65, you went to the Morgan State College at that time, Morgan State College.
Morgan State College, yes.
And 4 years you attended Morgan State College?
I think I was there really 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
So until 1970.
1970.
Now, you commuted back and forth between Westminster and...
No, I actually lived on campus all 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I was able to do that. You know, again, my family supported me through the college. I had grants. I think I had a senatorial scholarship that pretty much carried me all 5 years. You had to maintain the grade, of course, in order to hold on to scholarships. So I felt I did pretty well.
Were you the first member of your family to attend college?
No, actually, I have a cousin who's a year older, and he was at Morgan, so he was able to go as well.
But still, it's an unusual thing for your family, I guess, to have someone go to college.
I would think, yes, unusual.
And why did you decide to go to college?
Actually, I can recall in my high school year, I worked part-time at Carroll Beauty Shop on Main Street. Um, I was the person that would shampoo. I was a shampoo girl. And I actually had a passion for fashion and fashion design, fashion illustration, that type of thing. I used to love, I grew up with the old Katie King comic books, you know, paper dolls, that kind of thing. But because I had this passion, I would create my own fashions for the paper dolls and so forth and so on. I had an opportunity in one of the books to do a Draw Me contest where you actually drew the doll and then the fashion and so forth. Sent it in. I came home for lunch from this job one day, and I had somebody sitting in my living room from the Chicago Institute of Art who said, you know, you scored over 98% on this test, so anybody who scored over 90%, we come out and visit, we try to get you to come to the Chicago Institute of Art. That's where I really wanted to go. But my mother had something else to say about that, so she's like, you know, you need to go get a liberal arts education, you need to go, she was behind me, pushing me the whole time in terms of college, and you've got to get better, and you've got to make you great, you know. And so that's what I did. I said, okay, well, I won't do this. I'll just go and get a 4-year college education.
And what did you major in?
I had 3 different majors because I still tried to get to that fashion illustration and fashion design. So I went in under home economics, or yeah, I think it was home economics. Then I switched to art, but then I ended up in sociology. Between home economics and art, I realized that, you know, those folks really were artists at what they did. I wasn't quite making that grade, so I went on over to sociology, which is another love. You know, I'm a person that most people will tell you love to just do for others. I have this passion to just help the underdog somehow, or not the underdog, well, maybe the underdog is not the quite word, but, you know, to help those in need, those who are experiencing less than. And so when I applied for the job working with addicts, it was right up my alley in terms of helping people in need. So.
During that period, though, the 50s and the 60s, that was the height of the civil rights movement in this country. Mm-hmm. And was any of your family involved actively in the civil rights movement?
Not my family, per se, other than to have general opinions about it, but my friends. There were a couple of organizations that formulated around the time, and I recall some of them being a part of the organizations. And then I guess it might have been more in the 70s. I'm trying to recall these dates, because I was actually married and lived in Philadelphia. So that was in the early 70s. That we experienced a riot, in our first and only riot, I think, in Westminster.
So the riot took place in the 70s?
Yes, I think it was more in the 70s.
Do you know why there was a riot in the 70s in Westminster?
Well, it had to do with fractions of people. It started down in Riffles. What you call it? Pool place. And I think blacks and whites had attended there and usually got along reasonably well, because I really think, you know, some of the blacks did have friends who were white, you know, and got along fine. But then there were others who were more racist, couldn't get along. And I think that's what happened at the place, at the pool place, and then tempers got caught up and racist, you know, all around racism. But the white guys left that place, and the argument or whatever went on. It might even have been a fight down there. But I think as a way of retaliation, drove through Union Street, through rocks, into a lady's house. She had just gotten up from the rocking chair by the window, elderly lady, and or else she would have been killed, of course.
This was the African American part of town.
Yes, Union Street, the African American part of town.
Is that
They
also where
came-
the African American businesses were located?
There were no African American businesses.
Okay.
There was a store on the corner that was owned, by a white man. But, they had become almost like family, because that was a black community. The stuff in the store catered to the black community and so forth. And we just grew up with those folks, Mr. King, I remember his name was Mr. King. That was the only business. I think I can't remember where the laundromat is now. It might have been a restaurant, another kind of restaurant of some sort. But there were no black-owned businesses. So anyway, that's what sparked the riots. And it just kind of went on from there, because once they did that, then blacks kind of gathered together in the community on Union Street, and even from the other two areas, and just kind of rallied to Union Street, closed the borders of the street, called themselves really protecting the street, because the guys just kept coming through and doing things. And then at one point they were even running behind in people's yards. And, I can remember my mother getting paranoid about that, because this is an experience that they've never had.
How long does this last
Not feeling
for?
safe. I think it lasted a good week, maybe even longer than that, maybe a couple of weeks.
Was anyone hurt?
Yes, there were people who ended up being hurt indirectly because of it.
Any damage to property?
Yes, of course, the lady's house and other people's property, yeah.
Any burning of houses?
No burning of houses.
Do you know what the police did?
I remember them. Now, again, I lived in Philly, so I got this story when I came home, or when I talked to people, because I actually watched it on Channel 6 News in Philadelphia, and I immediately called home. And whoever was controlling the street at that time had told everybody in the houses what to do at certain times if things happened. You had to hit the floor and all that kind of stuff. They even had visuals where the women were providing coffee because the men stayed out all night long because the guys were just coming through doing things. So they, again, closed the borders and put a protection around the street and the folk there. I can recall them having they said they had a conversation with the city, with the mayor. It ended up, a certain number of citizens went down to the city council, I guess, or somewhere, city hall, and brought it to some kind of resolution. You know what I mean? Now, I don't know if folk were punished, if they actually were charged with anything. I don't know I don't remember any of that.
Well, after that riot, you said it was 1970, what year do you think it was?
I think early 70s.
After that took place, did race relations improve in Westminster?
I think the organizations developed. Attempts were made to better the race relations. And I think racism is probably always going to be there in a very subtle sort of way. You just can't change people's attitudes like that. But it wasn't so much overt. Now, as I'm talking, I can remember even before the 70s when you initially was talking about the 50s and the 60s, that KKK was very present, very much present, Gamber, Finksburg area. No blacks lived in that area. It was clear-cut the area for racism, because that's where Ku Klux Klan was, and that's where they operated. I can remember an occasion where they came to Westminster was at the railroad tracks on one side of the street handing out literature and so forth. And whatever the organization was at that time, and I was a part of that because we started at our church and then walked down because we knew that was going to happen because it had to be publicized. So we were on one side of the street, they were on the other side of the street. It was kind of tension, but nobody ever crossed.
How old were you then when you did that?
I was a teenager. I was a teenager, and whatever this organization was, and I can't just recall the name of it right now, but John Lewis was a part of it, and George Collins was a part of it as well. I can recall that we went to Washington, D.C. He formulated what they called a Poor People March. I mean, they had a Poor People March in D.C. John got the kids together, and we, on the back of a truck, went down and participated in the Poor People's March. when it happened down in Washington, D.C.
1960s?
That was in the 60s, yeah. I can remember working in the medicine area, working with giving people medications and things like that, somehow or another helping out in that area. That was a unique experience, you know, with people just everywhere.
Was this organization affiliated with your church? United Methodist?
No, I think it was more just a community effort. We were a part, we were in there, because I think John was a member of Union Street at the time. But George Collins, for example, was from Sykesville, was from Johnsville United Methodist Church. So I think it was more a community effort.
This was before the NAACP had a chapter in Carroll County.
Yes, this was.
And when you used to go down with other members of this organization to, well, confront's probably the wrong word, but to have a presence when the KKK was in town.
I can only remember doing that one time.
What did you do when you arrived there? What was your purpose to be there?
Their meeting walking on the other side of the street, just to send the message that we are against what you are against.
Did you sing like hymnals or that type of thing?
I think we did sing. I don't remember chanting, but I think we might have sang spirituals or something.
Did you get any
freedom kinds of things?
Did you get any kind of not feedback, but clash with the KKK over that?
We never clashed. Verbally, but physically, nothing ever happened.
Now, how about your family? Did they say to you, I can't go to Finksburg, I can't travel to Finksburg because of this, because of the KKK presence there?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we couldn't. There was no stopping in Finksburg. There was no living in Finksburg. You just went through Finksburg. You just went through Gamber. You never stopped. Never.
Is that because there had been violence against African Americans?
Just a sense of, maybe here and there, different people experiencing that you would hear, not on a major scale with them, but just the fact that they were there. So we just, you just don't put yourself in harm's way, You try to avoid that area altogether. Of course, now it's different because blacks do live in Finksburg and Gamber area, but I think I hope that it's much different. I'm thinking that it is because they now live there, have bought homes there.
I mean, could you sense in the 60s whether the KKK was a fringe group or was it supported by the general population? Or
I think because there was a lot more racism back there, then obviously that was an important group. I don't know how much support they had, you know what I mean? We would have rumors that, or hearsay or whatever, that maybe some town officials were part of the KKK, things like that. I really don't know. I really couldn't say.
How about, were you aware, was it difficult for your family or other African Americans to get jobs in Westminster during the 60s?
I would say there was not a lot of blacks in professional positions, I'll put it that way. I mean, I can remember just, again, taking in people's clothing, usually white people's clothing, to press, working in their homes as maids, being the cooks or the cleaners, working at the college. The positions at the college were maids. I worked there part-time when I was going to school at Morgan because my grandmother worked there. And so I was able to get a job there. It was as a maid, or we worked in the kitchen as the bakers and the cooks and so forth and so on. Those are the kinds of positions that we held. Or we took in boarders into our own homes and, generated money that way. But I don't recall a whole lot of people being in professional positions.
How about trying to get loans from banks back then and purchase a house?
I don't know how, I don't know, but I do know that blacks owned homes. And I don't know how they were, whether that was something passed down through generations. For example, I don't know how we were able to purchase our home.
Is it possible that you had your own private organization that loaned money among yourselves to purchase
Maybe there
homes?
were banks that did do that. It's interesting. It's an interesting question. I just don't know how that came about, but I do know that there were some folks on Union Street that did own their own homes.
Now, when you graduated in 1970 from Morgan State, you came back to Carroll County.
No, that's when I got married and I relocated to Philadelphia and ended up being away for, well, 8 years, I guess.
And then you returned to Carroll County in 1978?
1978, I returned back to
And why did you return to Carroll County in 1978?
The marriage failed, and so I divorced and came home, and then proceeded to start a new life.
Now, were you working when you were in Philadelphia?
Yes. That period of time, though, I mean, I still didn't hold a professional job. I was more like a homemaker. My husband preferred that. He was in the military, but he just preferred that I be a homemaker and not necessarily hold a position. So I was here and there and everywhere, between Germany and Philly sometimes, and then we relocated to Tennessee. I was working, his mother owned a restaurant in Philadelphia, so I worked a lot there. When we were in Germany, I held a job at the Geico insurance company. So, but that was maybe for about a year. And then I returned to the States.
And when you came back to Carroll County, you got a job doing what?
I immediately saw the job in the newspaper for a counselor at the health department, drug counselor. I applied for the job and was able to get the job. And so I started working there in, I believe, April of 1978. It was only a matter of 2 weeks once I returned home that I went to work there.
And how long did you work there for?
I worked there for about 30 years. I retired from there, a year ago, I guess.
Last year, 2007?
Yes.
And what did you do there?
I was a drug counselor, addictions counselor.
Now, so you were there for about 30 years, so you saw the addiction problems of Carroll County residents for that 30-year period. Did it change in any way as to drug of choice or severity or even age of the people you were seeing?
Drug of choice changed from primarily alcohol and marijuana to heroin, cocaine, a little PCP every now and then, not so much so. Age, because while I was there in those 30 years, I worked adults, but I also worked adolescent. I was the adolescent counselor for a while. In fact, I transported, our health department connected to the shock trauma unit for drinking and driving among youth for what they call the high-risk trauma prevention program. So I transported youth down there once a month who had been caught for DWIs as part of their treatment, so to speak. And so I saw the age, average age, maybe 15, 16, later on, as I transferred from outpatient to working in the detention center, and then began to experience clients at 18 coming into the jail, but learning that their drug of choice, or their drug history started at 11 and 8 and 9. So, you know, it started much earlier with kids later on. And then these kids were involved in heroin. They were not so much involved with marijuana and so forth. They started out, the process is cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, and then rapidly into cocaine, heroin. So they started with the cocaine and heroin at a lot earlier age than when I was dealing with kids in outpatient. They started with alcohol, cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, 14, 13, you know, that type of thing.
To you, was this a problem, addiction problem that was rampant through teenage years, or was it a small group of teenagers that you felt you were dealing with?
No, I think the problem was significant in terms of adolescents. Even when I was the adolescent case manager, I thought the problem was significant then. I think, of course, a lot of people would deny the significance of it, but a child with an addiction problem, it is not a child existing by itself. He has friends. If there was a DWI situation, if kids got killed, it wasn't one child. When they traveled in groups of 5 or 6, in one car or whatever the case might be. So 5 or 6 people got injured. So I just think the problem was significant, and maybe the community just wasn't in tune with that, maybe until they got into the heroin, and 20 or 25 kids died in a matter of, I don't know what, 1 to 3 years.
When was that?
The years I'm real fuzzy about, but I just know it was a very short period of time. Because once that began to happen, the community began to rally around heroin prevention and that type of thing, more drug prevention and so forth and so on. More money coming in to the county. I mean, I can remember at one point it being called a hot spot. Hot spots was Union Street, Pennsylvania Avenue corridor. I can remember major drug dealing going on there, and I lived there at the time. Right on Union Street, right on Pennsylvania Avenue. I mean, literally open air market. I mean, the whole shebang. I mean, I can recall a police officer being right here at the mailbox on Union Street, but yet everybody was moving around him. I mean, like 100 or so people on the street one Memorial Day. Major drug trafficking going on.
1990s this was that, or before that, or?
Maybe in the 90s. Maybe in the 90s.
When you left in 2007, there was an improvement, at least in the amount of funds and the care administered to the citizens for addiction?
When I left the health department?
Yes.
There was a lot more invested. There's a lot more invested in terms of the nature of treatment programs. Junction was the drug treatment program for adolescents, but now it's pretty much drugs, alcohol. They do both. Carroll County Health Department now does both. There were major changes that came about. I mean, the state, of course, got involved. Many more drug prevention organizations in Carroll County. Just a lot more began to happen as a result of that. Now, I can't tell you, because I've been removed from it, what the numbers are like now, you know what I mean, in terms of the kids. I know it's still a pressure I have nieces and nephews. I have nieces primarily, who are now 15, 16, who I know are experiencing the same little kind of stresses or pressures in terms of using alcohol, for example. It's a beginning point. So it's still out there. It's always probably going to be there. But there's a lot more treatment available, a lot more prevention. A lot of folk queuing in on the kids now when it happens the first time around, that I can see. I don't know if it's ever going to go away, but at least there's enough early intervention taking place, which I think is real critical, even down to elementary level, even down to working with kids in kindergarten, in some aspects, because that's really where it needs to start in terms of changing attitudes and so forth. Even as far as working with families. I mean, these kids come out of unhealthy families or dysfunctional families. I know that there's a lot going on in Carroll County as far as addressing families and so forth and so on. So a lot more being done.
Let me change the subject a little bit. Going back to the 60s, were members of your family, any of them participating in the Vietnam War, were actually in the Vietnam War?
My brother, I don't know about the Vietnam War. I remember my brother Dennis was in Korea.
In Korea.
I don't remember anybody in my family per se being in Vietnam, but I know of others who were in Vietnam.
Well, was there a?
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I have a brother that was in Vietnam. He was in Vietnam. My brother Walter. He's a Vietnam veteran.
Was there a veterans organization that was African American only in Carroll County?
No.
Now I understand. Were you a member, or are you a member of the NAACP?
Now, yes.
When did you join?
Well, I had joined a couple of years ago and then let the membership go, and then rejoined again. What is this? 2008, maybe early this year.
And what do you do with them or for them?
Right now, I'm just in. I attended the meetings, but I'm I'm not as active as I should be, but that's going to change.
Do you know what they do? I mean, what do they do?
In terms of addressing racism in
Carroll County?
Also helping in other areas, helping with getting minority teachers through the Carroll County public school system. They associate themselves also with McDaniel College around Martin Luther King celebration time and get involved there. Wherever there is that cross-reference of blacks and whites, I've seen them making that effort to get involved. I know Jean has gone on behalf of the minority teacher issue, out of the area even to attend different things as far
Jean,
as Jean Lewis, who's the current president. And I've known, even through working in the Carroll County Detention Center, even working with other minorities, not just blacks, but, Hispanics and so forth and so on, that they've tried to help in that presence, have a presence there, help out in some way. Whenever anybody calls on them, has an issue and makes the claim, they go and try to help in some way. So.
How about African American businesses in Carroll County? Have they increased, or?
I don't know any African American businesses, black owned, in Carroll County. I don't know of any, and I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong, but I would think that I would not. But I don't know of any black owned businesses still in Carroll County.
Let's talk about your church briefly. Your church, as you said, has been around
since 1866.
1866. And it was an all African American church at that time. And to this day, is it primarily
over the last several years, it has been very small percentage of Caucasian folks who have joined the church. I think folk have joined, they experience an emotional, have an very emotional experience with the black experience in a black church. And different folks have joined along the way. I think they've liked the preacher at the time, they liked what was going on in terms of ministry at the time, and so they joined. They've come and they've gone, like when the preacher would leave, they're no longer there. We still have friendships with some of those people. I see them occasionally, but they don't have an active presence. But when they were there, they had an active presence. At least some of them did. Even now, we have just one who married into a black family and consequently has stayed. And I believe, and is very much involved, very active, extremely active in the church. As well as in other community organizations. She likes, I believe, the black experience still. She's very connected to the people there, to the family there. She's very much a part of our family. We had a white lady who came last week. We had a yard sale. And she just found her way to the yard sale, but was ministered to while she was there, came the next day to church, has since had a conversation with the pastor. So, in a very small percentage, but it's still primarily black. We worship in a black experience. But like I said, our membership is maybe a little less than, maybe 1%.
How large of a congregation is it?
Not very large. Usually there's a certain number on the books and then a certain number in attendance. But I'd say maybe it's over 100 and some on the books. And maybe on an average, maybe 60-some people a Sunday, 50 to 60.
Both from a historical point of view and currently, what's the relationship of your church, United Methodist, to the community at large?
We've tried to really be the beacon for the community. For example, the community center that sits across the street from us now is called the Westminster Community Center, of which I'm going to call her name, Debbie Sims, is the one person who's a member of our church that I was talking about earlier, is the director. But that was birthed out of Union Street United Methodist Church as a result of the riots over in California, communities came together, neighborhoods came together and said we need to do something. The United Methodist Conference bought into that, the Baltimore Washington United Methodist Conference. Then they began to create what they call communities of shalom. And a number of us, the pastor at that time, Pastor Howard Hinson, involved us in that process. And so a number of us went for training sessions on an ongoing basis to learn about communities of shalom and how to create one. As a result of that, we created the Westminster Community of Shalom. And from that, we became the Westminster Community Center. That is a house that was owned by one of our oldest members. He passed away. The daughter decided to sell. We were, praise God, in a position where we could buy. And so now that is our property. The house was too old to do anything with, and so we tore that down. And the question was, with the congregation, what do we do? We surveyed the community to find out what the needs were. The needs were that there are youth here who are 7, 8 coming up with nothing to do, a lot of them. We need a center. We need something here. We need something for the kids. So that birthed Boys and Girls Club. We didn't have the building yet, but the idea was we're going to create a center where we can house the Boys and Girls Club, where we can be a beacon for the community, for youth in this area. And now, as a result of the Boys and Girls Club developed very early, and we housed them in our church for the longest time. That was led by Phyllis Hammond, who was the director of the Boys and Girls Club at the time. And then the Westminster Community of Shalom, the organization, worked with the community, began to work with the community. People just began to come on board. Westminster United Methodist Church was a key player. Some other organizations were a key player, key people in the community, key leaders. The mayor has since become a key leader. City got on board with helping us. Grants began to come, and $1 million project is now sitting across the street with an elevator and all. I mean, it's going to have an elevator, it's going to have this, it's going to have that. But we met on an ongoing basis and got this piece together with the help of the community. I mean, they basically rallied.
And what do you do there? What goes on there?
I'm a member of the organization, so what we're trying to do is, the Community of Shalom was about economic development in the community, doing things that bring about peace and shalom in the community, and especially now between fractions of people. It's now Mexican, white, black, Hispanic. And so we sit at the table and try to come up with ideas in terms of how to do just that. The community, what can we bring into this center that can aid the community in some way at less expense to the community, little or no expense to the community, to make it easy for them. So hence the Boys and Girls Club is now there, functioning. They're running a summer camp program right now of about 60 kids, I think, are there. They're in need of some support. We need the community to rally towards them. Also, the Westminster Community of Shalom, which is the organization that is in charge of the Westminster Community Center. A lot of people believe that that building is the Boys and Girls Club, but it's not. It's really the community center, where the Boys and Girls Club is just one of the projects that's there. There are other projects there as well. There's people there who are offering art to young children. There's yoga classes going on there. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to provide opportunities for the community in there. We're looking at holding financial workshops. PNC Bank is helping to get on board with some of that. So we're kind of networking with organizations in the community and developing alliances and partnerships with banks and so forth and so on to keep that building operating. And so we're seeking support on behalf of Westminster Community of Shalom for the Westminster Community Center. We're seeking some support for the organization itself so that we can continue to operate as an organization, that we can operate that Westminster Community Center, that we can provide and meet the needs of the community, not just the Union Street community, but the Carroll County area in general.
And that seems like it ties into your lifelong work of drug counseling, of a way of preventing.
Of just helping, yes, in whatever way, whether directly or indirectly.
And also with the Boys and Girls Clubs, I mean, one of the reasons why I would think children get into drugs is the fact they don't have that type of activity to get involved in.
Yes. The Boys and Girls Club has an advisory council that I'm going to get back on board with. There's just a lot that can be done just to help the youth in the area, and we've begun. I'm still amazed. I'm like, here's the building. It has an elevator in it. Praise God, the community came together, and we still need them to come together. So hopefully people will continue to give support to the center, and it'll be there a long time.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Morrison, for your time today.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.